This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Father Scott Bogochnik is the rector of St. Mary Cathedral and also former vocation director in the Diocese of St. Cloud, Minnesota, a great voice on a variety of things, and we're going to task him with sorting through how's the best way to encourage proper dress and behavior in church. Father, great to have you along this morning.
Glenn, great to be with you and all of our listeners out there. Yes, this has become a growing concern each year. Culture kind of wanes, even family life, that important formation that one receives from a mom and a dad. If that struggles in a culture, oftentimes we see, children not maybe being given that proper formation growing up. Church clothes maybe don't mean what they once did. And so it's important, for us to discuss it with our neighbors and others of like mind so we can be creative in taking on this challenge.
Is part of it, Father, our culture is a little less formal than it used to be. So we're, even look at pictures from 50 years ago of ball games and, guys had sport coats and ties on going to the baseball game. And we're so far from that now. And that's even trickled over into church. Yeah,
there's certainly been a watering down, right, of those kind of standards. And, just that, we talk a little bit about modesty. We talk about purity of heart, those kind of things. And of course, it's much more than just about clothing, right? I think that's an important point to make is the church isn't here just to saying, hey, you ought to wear this or not wear this. It always comes back to holiness, right? And loving Jesus Christ and what does he will for us? What does he will for society? And so I think with that as the center point, we say, well, the church really places this conversation around the Ninth Commandment to kind of respect thy neighbor and connect it to the virtue of temperance when it comes to kind of moderating, okay, what are the desires moving through the heart? How do we order those desires to God? And improper dress, right, can be something that can distract us in unhealthy ways. When Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount says, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God, a lot of this is about protecting the purity of the heart and really ordering our desires to God and to the proper dignity of men and women. And so I do think, we're certainly seeing this increase in culture. I think it probably is connected to also family life, moms and dads maybe feeling more and more pressure, right? The kids at school are wearing this, or even parents these days, right? Maybe they weren't formed in the best manner. And so I think we can all agree there needs to be something done. I think oftentimes the challenge as a pastor is how to approach it with a proper sensitivity, but also directness that can communicate the love and, again, try to generate and animate this purity of heart that leads to holiness.
Might some be surprised if they're thinking more of the activity that's coming up after church or right before church and say, well, I'm not purposely trying to dress more informally or maybe accidentally on the edge of immodesty. It's just, we just came from the ball game or we're heading outside for a picnic after church or something like that. And is part of the challenge to be able to help folks focus on the Mass is time that's set aside from regular life.
Yeah, and there's no doubt, right? Is the shift away from maybe regular practice of faith and prayer. We could say, okay, the family rosary was much more common back in the day. A family, not that just prays together, but even a family that just simply eats together. I've mentioned from time to time, having a family meal can be one of the biggest first steps in kind of reforming and reestablishing some kind of, standards of life within the home. It's hard to have an influence on our kids if we're never around them. And again, I know many people listening now, right? I'm preaching to the choir in many capacities, but maybe there's grandparents listening, right, who see their children during the summertime or just on various occasions, and they can have, such a big influence. But I think, to begin right with that, right, with time around our children and communicating very clearly, frankly, by our own dress. I'd see my parents dress up. We would have to go from like running outside to say, okay, it's time to put on church clothes. Well, church clothes were a very particular thing. And I guess I always found I liked my church clothes. I thought they were new and sharp and good looking. And so maybe one thing can be is we find clothes our kids really like. There's a way to be both modest, but also fashionable. And that doesn't mean having to break the bank. There's, very reasonably priced clothes that could help us honor that time. I know my brother and I would often be serving, right? And so that would, but even as servers, I want servers to be dressed in a way that honors the liturgy as well. Yeah, it very much begins, I think, for me, with family life, ordering that around our own example, but then also being creative in how we can say, hey, this is this is important not just to us, but this is a gift we give to God, to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, as St. Paul says in Romans. And so that's something, for us to keep in mind.
Oh, yes. And as far as servers, the mileage on the tennis shoes, right, might speak to, how dressed up or not the kids are underneath what they're wearing up there. What does Scripture and tradition teach us about how, again, we need to kind of set aside that experience from Mass so it is different from regular life, Father?
Yeah, very much. Again, I mean, it's just, the cardinal virtues we speak of: justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. Temperance very much is ordered to purity, to modesty, to chastity, to, again, the ordering of the desires of the heart. And, the Catechism in, the 2500s, it says something about, protecting the mystery of the person. St. Pope John Paul II would often say that, more in reference to things like pornography. He says pornography doesn't show too much of the person, it shows too little of the person. And when we talk about modesty, when we talk about proper dress, a similar thing happens. In one sense, it doesn't show too much of the person. It's hiding the true dignity, the innocence, the beauty, the mystery of the person that is meant for a particular other and not for all. And so it goes both ways. It's meant to protect the mystery of that person, but also, right, it's a meaning to really protect others as well. I mean, just the temptation that a lack of modesty can bring into the world. And we know it well from billboards to social media and all these kind of things, that the desires are stirred. And so we want to direct all of our desires back to the Lord. They're given by Him, for Him, and so I think that too, it's not a matter of somehow becoming afraid of our desires, but really ordering all of them to Christ. And when they go askew, that we bring them back. We ask the Lord for strength and forgiveness in those areas. But yeah, very much that virtue of temperance the Lord wants to help us with. And as as I mentioned before, kind of St. Paul speaking about, offering our bodies as a living sacrifice. There are parts in what St. Paul tells us too. 1 Corinthians, he really says, glorify God in your body. 1 Corinthians 6:20, he really wants us to use our bodies to glorify Him in all things. And so this isn't about kind of hiding in the corner. This isn't about being afraid to exercise all the capacities of the body. The body was created by God. It's a beautiful creation. Because I think, Glenn, too, there's this other side where there's so many people, too, just maybe that have great shame about their bodies. I mean, this is something I deal with when it's in the high schools and vocations, different areas like this, especially among young women who have been shown kind of this impossible standard. And so they're always trying to mimic this, and it leads to great burden for them. So I just think in this topic, right, while we're talking about being properly kind of attired for Mass, that we also don't create kind of this shameful attitude that says, oh, the body's bad, we need to hide it, you need to kind of whisk it away. No, the body was made for the glory of God. We are called to, with proper custody and proper stewardship, use the gifts of the body in a way that leads to holiness of life.
We want to help one another to holiness and glorify the Lord by all of our activities, including how we dress. Thinking for a minute, Father, too, about dress codes at Christian organizations. Often, in terms of how men dress, there might be an entire paragraph. And then you get to the part of how women dress, and there's, 3 or 4 pages. How much responsibility we need to take for ourselves with how we respond and not leave it up to the other, whether that other be a man or a woman. But we want to do our best, but also take responsibility, too.
Yeah, and sometimes, something the culture continues to kind of water down, just the differences, which we know are so bold and strong and beautiful, but the differences between men and women and boys and girls, and just what stirs the heart of a man or what stirs the heart of a woman, I think can often be misunderstood by the opposite sex. And so that's something that, at age-appropriate times you can discuss with teenagers and just say, hey, you may not understand, young woman, how your dress influences a man, how your influences and your actions influence a woman. I think that can be a formative piece of life and, educational piece of life. But there's no doubt about, the fact that God made a woman different than a man, and He made the man's heart different than a woman's, that we shouldn't try to explain away. We shouldn't try to say, okay, no, everyone's kind of the same. No, we're not the same. But I think we also then have to explain to the young women, we're not trying to single you out, right? This is not something in which it just happens to be the form of the woman somehow, right? it takes different clothing and it develops in different stages. And so that's a fact of life that I think, we can be sometimes ashamed to admit. But, as a spiritual father, I just think, gosh, if I don't speak into these realities, if I don't, if young people raise these questions, or just have them understand more deeply, like, this is really important. It's not the end all be all, but it serves this beautiful higher purpose. And it will free you up in your relationships just to be the person God called you to be. So maybe, again, Glenn, always centering all of this around Jesus Christ and around holiness of life. This is a very practical way in which we can assist our young people as parents, being very strong and firm, holding the line, even if they, throw a tantrum. It's a beautiful way to love them. And then for each of us, just to model that ourselves as best that we can.
And here's hoping those arguments, kind of resolve sometime after the years of wanting to wear the Batman costume to church before you get into some of the more challenging clothing. 30 seconds left, Father. Last word on encouragement for honoring the Lord with how we dress coming to church.
When we can make it something special, something holy, something that's about, the God who loves us so, so much. And again, if we can point to the positive, I think so often we're going to be much more effective in this particular issue. And again, it's all about honoring the body, honoring the beauty of the body, the dignity of the body, and giving our whole best to what God asks of us as we worship Him and then live our lives. So just prayers for moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas out there, for pastors as well. Let's continue working on this, such an important topic. And again, Glenn, good to be with you and of all of our listeners.
Oh, thank you so much, Father. Good comments on kind of a tough topic, but let's try to honor our Lord in everything that we do, including how we dress. So Father Scott Bogochnik from St. Cloud, Minnesota, joining us this morning.